Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comet Magazine and Fuller Seminary. I'm Mark Labberton. Welcome to Conversing. We wish you a happy New Year's Eve. On this day, we're sharing a special short recording, an interview with Jemar Tisby, author of The Spirit of Justice, his most recent book, and his best-known book, The Color of Compromise, the truth about the church's complicity in racism. He's going to share with us some reflections and insights on how the Black church sees the New Year's Eve watch night service and why it's so important even to today. Jemar, welcome.
I'm so glad to be back with you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such an honor. I look forward to every opportunity to be with you, as well as to have an opportunity to have a recorded conversation on Conversing. So thank you for joining us. This is a special day as the calendar rolls over one more year. And it's an important day for many, many different reasons, symbolic as well as ordinary ticking of time, the chronology that guides all of our lives. But New Year's Eve in the United States is a particular event, especially for the African-American community. So we just wanted to take a moment today to have you give us insight into how we might think about this day and its meaning.
Well, I'll start with my own personal experience and background. I grew up hearing about watch night services, and it could go by many names. Maybe it was New Year's themed or whatever. I was never particularly interested in spending all night at church on New Year's Eve.
What a thought.
So I only attended a couple throughout my lifetime, but that was, of course, before I knew the history. And once I learned the history, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I'm still not sure I want to be at church on New Year's Eve, but there is a really robust history there of the watch night service in the Black Christian tradition.
So tell us about that. Why is it so? It's quite specifically so.
Yes. So it dates to the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War. So the Emancipation Proclamation, of course, was President Lincoln's declaration that all enslaved people in certain areas would be free, contingent, of course, that the Union won the Civil War. So it was very limited in scope, and yet it represented something massive symbolically. It represented that the president, that the White House, that the Union Army was truly behind eliminating slavery and emancipating all people. But the time between when Lincoln announced the proclamation and when it went into effect on January 1st, 1863, was a time of tense anticipation and uncertainty. A couple of gestures had already been made toward emancipation, really wartime exigencies.
Right.
So you had leaders, generals in Missouri and on the East Coast near southern Confederate territories. What was happening was all of these people, Black people, were crossing the Union lines and escaping to freedom. And these generals were trying to figure out what to do with all these people. And also they knew that enslaved people would be forced to help feed the war machine for the Confederates. So they wanted to take away laborers from the Confederates. So they had on the battlefield essentially declared emancipation for enslaved people, which Lincoln quickly overthrew. He didn't want them to do this piecemeal. He was concerned about politics, and for a lot of the war was more concerned about reunification of North and South than specifically emancipating enslaved people. So when he did finally sign the Emancipation Proclamation, it was several months before it went into effect. And what people were concerned about was, would the Confederates come back and make a deal with Lincoln that said, hey, we'll put down arms or we'll start a ceasefire in exchange for you letting us continue to enslave people? Or would the Union lose some catastrophic battle and therefore not have the power to enforce something like the proclamation? And no time in that period from the couple of months before when he announced it to when it went into effect was more tense than the night before. This is where Watch Night Service comes from. So December 31st, 1862, Black people all over the country joined their church congregations or faith communities and basically watched the clock to see if anything would come in at the last minute that would disrupt the proclamation from going into effect at 12 a.m. on January 1st, 1863. And so they gathered, they prayed, they sang songs. And what I like to encourage people to do is put yourself back in that moment as best you can. You have been part of a group of people that have been enslaved since your feet first hit the shores of North America. That generations of your family members, friends, church members have been enslaved, have prayed for freedom, have tried to escape to freedom, have been punished for trying to escape or organize for freedom. And finally, in this massive conflagration called the Civil War, you get the President of the United States saying that you will be free at this certain time. And all of those hopes, all of those prayers, all of those dreams, all of those longings are concentrated in the moments before midnight. And I relate in my new book, The Spirit of Justice, Frederick Douglass, his experience where he gathered in a congregation and they were all waiting with bated breath. And then finally, word comes over the telegraph that the Emancipation Proclamation is in effect. Jubilation, literally jubilee, that biblical word, right? For freedom,
Right.
for canceling of debts, nothing but joy. And he relates, people said anything, and no matter what they said, it was funny. It was the funniest thing you ever heard. Everyone was laughing, smiling, rejoicing, praising God for freedom. And what stood out to me was this was in the context of a faith community. It was in the context of a Christian religion. And so they were understanding this in the context of the Exodus and the Hebrews being freed from Pharaoh through God's intervention, and they're being freed from the pharaohs of the plantation to the promised land of freedom. And they sang spiritual songs and hymns. And ever since then, there's been a tradition of Black Christians gathering on New Year's Eve to have watch night service, to celebrate freedom, to anticipate the coming year, and to ask for God's blessing.
Well, we are on the cusp of a very important next year. And so much has already set the stage for what is unfolding vividly before us. And the significance of freedom, of justice, of the defeat of racism, of the long work, the long journey, the hard road that you and many others are helping to lead. It's just still so important. May the joy of remembering the power of the Emancipation Proclamation help motivate us as we think about our work and our life in this coming year. Thanks so much, Jemar.
Amen and amen.
Conversing is produced and distributed in partnership with Comment Magazine and Fuller Seminary. Peter Labberton is our engineer and editor. Evan Rosa is our producer. For more information about Comment Magazine, visit comment.org, where you can subscribe, read the current magazine issue, and browse their archive. Fuller Seminary is an evangelical, multi-denominational graduate institution committed to providing indispensable formational education for diverse Christian leaders everywhere. For information, visit fuller.edu. I'm your host, Mark Labberton. Thanks for listening with me.